Nanashi!
What is up, YouTube? This is Nanashi with a brand new deck profile video. This time I'll be showing you the return of my Metaphys deck. Many of you who have seen my older deck profiles will recall I used to run this deck and I had some complaints about it. But, as it turns out, they released new support for this archetype that I wasn't even aware of. Apparently I wasn't paying attention that day. And while Mekk-Knights was a fun experiment to try, it ended up getting kinda stale really fast. So now Metaphys is back, and despite the hit Gold Sarc, it's technically better than ever. Let's take a closer look. Starting with the monster lineup, we have a playset of Metaphys Decoy Dragon. It has the same pendulum effect as its monster effect. When your monster is targeted for an attack, you can target one of your Metaphys monsters that's banished or in your graveyard, banish this card, and if you do, special summon it in an attack position. And if this card happens to be banished, then during the next standby phase, you can special summon it back to the field. 3. Metaphys Ragnarok. One of the main playmakers of the archetype. If it's normal or special summoned, you can banish the top 3 cards of your deck, and if you do, for every Metaphys card that was banished by this effect, it gains 300 attack permanently. And if this card happens to do battle damage, which is fairly easy, especially if you happen to hit 2 or 3 banishes, you can special summon any level 5 or higher Metaphys monster from your deck, but you banish it during the end phase of the next turn. Add to it that this monster is also a tuner monster, and the fact that there's a level 2 pendulum effect monster suddenly makes a little bit more sense if you look back into ancient Metaphys cards, and I'll show you what I mean in a bit. But while we are on the subject of ancient Metaphys cards, we have Metaphys Armed Dragon. A level 7 normal monster, and I know what you're thinking, it's a normal monster, obviously it's not good. It does have relevance with my specific build because of a couple of specific cards. Otherwise, it's also a 2800 attack point beat stick, which is always good in my book. 3. Metaphys Daedalus. If it's special summoned by the effect of a Metaphys monster, you can banish all other face-up special summon monsters on the field. And if this card is banished, and during the next standby phase, you can shuffle this banished card back into the deck and then banish a different Metaphys card. 3. Metaphys Nephthys. If this card is special summoned by the effect of a Metaphys monster, you can banish all sets, spell, and traps on the field. If this card is banished and during the next standby phase, you can shuffle it into the deck and add any Metaphys card from your deck to your hand except a copy of itself. 2. Metaphys Tyrant Dragon. Though I am considering bumping it to 3, if it was special summoned by the effect of a Metaphys monster, it's unaffected by trap effects, and if it attacks a monster, it can make a second attack in a row. And if this card is banished, during the next standby phase, you can shuffle this banished card into the deck and special summon any Metaphys monster from your hand, but banish it during the end phase of the next turn. Next we move into the spell cards. Starting with a playset of Ace Metaphys, probably one of the best archetypal draw cards I've ever seen, and, in my opinion, one of the most artistically beautiful cards I've ever owned. As a soft once per turn, you can banish any Metaphys card from your hand, and if you do, you draw a card. And once per turn, if your Metaphys card in its owner's possession is banished, you apply one of these effects depending on whose turn it is. If it's your turn, all monsters on the field lose 500 attack and defense except Metaphys monsters. And if it's your opponent's turn, you change the battle positions of all monsters on the field except Metaphys monsters. 3. Called by the Grave. Originally a card designed to answer hand traps, but it's also relevant enough to deal with graveyard-based monster effects. 1 Dark Hole. 1 Gold Sarc, unfortunately, but even with it at 1, it's relevant enough to play, banishing any card out of your deck and then getting it to your hand 2 turns later. 3 Metaphys Factor, possibly one of the funniest field spells for any archetype I've ever seen. Each turn, a level 5 or higher Metaphys monster you normal summon can be summoned without tributing, but you banish it during the end phase of the next turn. This is relevant because of the extremely high number of high-level monsters in the archetype, but here's the effect that matters most. Your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to your Metaphys monster effect activations, which means your opponent can't stop your searches off of Nephthys, they can't stop your special summon banishes off of Daedalus, they can't stop any of it. As long as you have this field spell out, you are fairly well untouchable in terms of your monster effects. 1 Monster Reborn, staple card for me. And 2 Sacred Sword of 7 Stars, a techie spell card I used in my older version, but now I'm questioning if I should be running it at 2 or 3, or if it's even worth running at all. You banish a level 7 monster from your hand or face up from your side of the field to draw 2 cards, but you can only play one of it a turn. And next we have the trap cards. I'm running 3 bottomless just because of the fact that it fits with the dynamic of constant banishing of cards, but I am considering cutting it to 2, and if I do, I'll probably put in a 3rd Sacred Sword. Metaphys Ascension is a new card that the archetype got recently, and it's surprisingly useful. You discard a Metaphys card, draw a card, and then you can banish a Metaphys monster from your deck. When it's banished, you can add any Metaphys card from your deck to your hand except a copy of itself. Now you can only use one of these 2 effects per turn, but that's perfectly fine because more often than not, you're gonna be banishing this in whatever way you can. Triple Metaphys Dimension. If your opponent special summons a monster, except during the damage step, this lets you special summon any of your banished Metaphys monsters. And if your other Metaphys card is banished while this is face up, you can target and banish an opponent's card. And 1 copy of Solemn Warning, just a generic staple card I put in basically every deck now. Next we move into the side deck. First is a playset of Herald of the Abyss, a spell card that is basically a combination of a kaiju with the cost of Solemn Strike and a touch of Call by the Grave. You pay 1500 life points and declare a monster type and an attribute. Your opponent sends a monster they control from the field to the graveyard with that matching type and attribute, and for the rest of the turn, any monsters with the same names cannot activate their effects. 3 Shared Ride, a techie card that people have been recommending I put in my side decks for a while now, and I really didn't see the relevance until I started playing it myself in a slower deck like this. 3 Twin Twisters. Because of the fact that we now have the Pendulum for the Metaphys, discarding my cards to the graveyard is not necessarily a death sentence anymore. 3 Gozen Match, locking both players into 1 attribute of monster at a time, and since this deck is 100% light attribute including the extra deck, I have no reason to care. 1 Solemn Johnson, pay half your life points to negate anything except for a monster effect. And 2 Solemn Strike, paying 1500 points to do what Solemn Johnson can't. And finally, we finish up with the extra deck. Oh, but I am going to preface this. I barely ever go into the extra deck except for maybe 1 monster. Metaphys Horus, the most used monster in this extra deck, at 3. Depending on what you use for its Synchro Summon, it gains a couple of different effects. If you use a normal monster, which I don't, it's unaffected by card effects this turn. If you use an effect monster, which I do, you can target 1 other face-up card on the field and permanently negate it. Or if you use a Pendulum monster, and this is the best one, your opponent chooses 1 monster they control and gives control of it to you, but it cannot attack this turn. Because of Metaphys Factor, this means that not only do I get a free negate and a free monster, my opponent can't do anything to stop it. 2 Star Eater. It must be Synchro Summoned and cannot be special summoned by other ways. Its Synchro Summon cannot be negated. When Synchro Summoned, cards and effects cannot be activated, and if this card attacks, it is unaffected by other card effects until the end of the damage step. A random rank 7 light that I found that actually does things, number 7 Lucky Straits. It requires 3 level 7 monsters, so I'm almost never summoning it. You can detach a material and roll a 6-sided die twice, and its attack points become the larger number between the 2 rolls, times 700. Then if both rolls together were exactly 7, you get a bonus effect. You can either send all other cards on the field to the graveyard, special summon any monster from your hand or from either graveyard, or draw 3 cards and discard 2. Then I have a small Galaxy Eyes package. Full Armor Photon Dragon, which can stack itself on top of another Galaxy Eyes Exceeds monster and detach a material to pop a card. Number 38 Hope Harbinger Dragon Titanic Galaxy, god that name, which can negate a spell card or effect every turn for free and attach it to himself as an Xyz material, redirects attacks to himself, and if a face-up Xyz monster you control dies, this card lets you add its attack points to another monster you control. Galaxy Eyes Prime Photon Dragon, which, I'll be honest, is purely in here because it's 4,000 attack points and is a stack target. 107 Galaxy Eyes Tachyon Dragon, which can detach to negate all face-up effects, and if your opponent happens to activate and resolve an effect during the battle phase, not only does this card gain 1,000 attack points, but it also gains an additional attack. And Galaxy Eyes Cypher Blade Dragon, which can stack itself on any rank 8 Galaxy Eyes Xyz monster, detaches a material, then targets a card on the field and destroys it, and if this card were to die, you can summon back the original Galaxy Eyes Cypher. I did plan on putting one in here, but I actually sold it for value. Moving into the links, we have 3 Hip Hoshininigan. All light monsters gain 500 attack and defense, all dark monsters lose 400 attack and defense, and if it's destroyed by battle or card effect, I can add any light monster in my graveyard back to my hand. And Zephyr Metaltron. requires 2+ monsters special summoned from the extra deck, like a Link 2 and a Synchro. If a monster it points to that was special summoned from the extra deck is destroyed by battle or an opponent's card effect, I can add a monster from my grave or a face-up Pendulum monster from my extra deck to my hand, which is how I can recoup my Metaphys Pendulum. And I can target a monster on each player's field that was special summoned from the extra deck except itself and banish both until the end phase, which does actually trigger certain effects in my deck, especially if I happen to banish Metaphys Horus. And that is the deck. This archetype has come a long way thanks to the new support cards it received. The trap card that gives you immediate search capabilities when banished, the Pendulum monster that allows you to actually play Metaphys Horus, which I'm hoping is their subtle way of saying that this card is supposed to be part of their archetype. And even with Gold Sarcophagus going to 1, it's not impossible to play this deck even though it is so heavily reliant on banishing. You just have to be a little bit more precise with the cards you banish first, making sure you hit Ascension as often as possible in as few turns as possible. This deck still has a few problems though, mainly that it's still inherently slow. But when you build an archetype off of high-level monsters that don't have the ability to special summon themselves freely or with some kind of condition being met, it's going to be a little bit slow. And that's kinda half the fun of the deck, is finding a way to make it work better. And I can safely say that these new cards that we've received have made this archetype better. I thank you guys for watching the deck profile, and if you can think of any ways that I can improve this Metaphys deck, feel free to let me know. In the meantime, this has been Nanashi, signing out.